Welcome to the Voodoo Power Podcast.
Welcome to Plates and Pancakes. We're sitting down today with Ron McKeefery. Coach McKeefery is an entrepreneurial strength coach and has held such positions as a special assistant to the head coach of high performance culture at the University of Alabama. He was also the head strength conditioning coach for football at the University of Washington. And in 2 years at Washington, the team went on to have a 25-3 record, culminating in a college football playoff Sugar Bowl win and a national championship appearance, ending the year ranked number 2 in the nation. McKeefery has twice been named Collegiate Strength Conditioning Coach of the Year, first by the Professional Football Strength Conditioning Society, and next by the National Strength Conditioning Association. In 2020, Coach McKeefery was awarded the International Coach of the Year by S&C Education based in the United Kingdom. In 2013, McKeefery was honored as a Master Strength Conditioning Coach by the Collegiate Strength Conditioning Coaches Association. Coach McKeefery picked up the highest designation by the NSCA in 2019, earning the Registered Strength Conditioning Coach Emeritus. He holds a PhD in Christian counseling, a master's in adult education, and a dual bachelor's degree in biology and physical education. He is also the author of CEO Strength Coach. So welcome to the show.
Appreciate it, Stephen. Thanks for having me.
I had gotten your book and I started reading through it, and I'm embarrassed to say I really didn't even know what school you had been at. I just picked up the book, started reading it, saw Ottawa. You spent a lot of time in Eastern Kansas. I work at Lacine Powerhouse. My nephew played at Ottawa, so it was a natural connection. So you're from north of the river, North Kansas City. What led you to Ottawa?
Yeah, football is the answer. I think, as we both share faith, I think that was something that was, God driven for sure. But, it's obviously where I met my wife and, started this whole thing, just kind of series of events through that experience really put a foundation in place. But yeah, the short answer is I was a quarterback in high school, and I wanted to play quarterback in college, and I was getting recruited to play defense everywhere. And they were one of the few schools that would let me play quarterback, and then I ended up moving to defense. So,
Well, in the book you talk about that, and there's actually something really kind of interesting in all of that. You wanted to be quarterback so bad, but you ended up moving to defense so you could help the team and then you could play. And then you talk about dreams of NFL and then kind of having to let those go and chase new dreams. Did you ever get confident in letting go of some of those dreams that you've held for a really long time to chase new opportunities?
yeah, I think you naturally get to a point where, that door closes, but other doors open. And, I'm a firm believer in, two things. I think one, you shoot for the stars and you hit the moon, right? I think that's, part of it. The other part of it is I think, coaches, the people that are listening to this, I think they can take away from, it's easy for me now, having worked in the NFL, having coached Hall of Famers and those things to look at a kid and say, okay, this guy's going to go to the NFL or not. And I'm sure those coaches that were at Ottawa when there's this little, kid that's playing NAI ball talking about playing in the NFL were probably rolling their eyes, saying that there's no way type of thing. But I think right now you don't want to be a dream killer. It doesn't mean you can't be realistic, but I think you need to paint the picture, right? And so what I try to do with my athletes is say, cool, you want to be in the NFL? That's exactly what I want for you. But we're going to define good. This is what an NFL player does. This is what an NFL player looks like. This is how they act. This is what the habits they form. This is the numbers that they have to hit. And so, and typically those things all kind of come through the weight room, right? Getting stronger, getting faster, getting bigger. And so instead of being a person that's a dream killer, I become one of the only people that can help them accomplish their dream, and I think that's a different mindset. I think it's important for individuals to lift people up. I don't think you have to be delusional or jump into some people's delusion. But I think, defining good and holding them accountable to that, can do it. And I think that's kind of what happened with me is I think people held me accountable to, the fact that I wasn't hitting some of those numbers that maybe I needed to hit, and started painting different pictures of ways that I can maybe accomplish that same dream in different ways.
In the book, you talk about sitting down with your athletes, talking about goals, kind of learning a little bit about them so that you can help navigate them in their career. Like you just said, hey, we're not quite hitting this goal here. We need to improve this. We need to improve that. I find that's pretty helpful with the athletes we work with. We give out a questionnaire and then they can kind of line out their whole goals. You get to learn a little bit about them. You get to learn what's going on in their life and how maybe you can help them in things not related to strength and conditioning. How are you able to develop a system that could, as you've grown in this industry, that you can help navigate athletes in the short time you have them more efficiently?
It is tough, especially tougher now with NIL and some of these things where, you don't have 4 years to develop that really strong bond. But you refer to, like, I have what I call a why meeting now where, I asked, three questions. If you weren't a football player, what would you do? What's the hardest thing you've ever been through? Who's the most influential person in your life? And I took that. There's a book called Start With Why by Simon Sinek, and I love the concept of the golden circle. You have to know the how, the how and the what before you can determine the why, or you got to know the why before you determine the how and the what. But they never really told you how to get to the why. If I ask you why do you have a gym, or why do you do a podcast, or why do you coach, or why do you play, like most of the time you're going to get a surface level answer. And it's not until you model that, I would talk about the hardest thing I've ever been through. I would talk about, what I would do if I wasn't coaching or playing. And, when you model that, then all of a sudden you get a deeper response and you're able to form a little bit stronger relationship in that moment to where it's not just X's and O's. It's not just I'm a coach, you're an athlete. I know your dreams. I know the hardest thing you've been through. I know who you want to make proud. And so it makes it easy to push some of those buttons when it's tough. Maybe you're not acting the way that you want to be acting. And it's like, okay, well, grandma, well, pastor, well, dad, well, former coach, well, will they be proud of the actions that you got going on right now? And that little, centering of an athlete typically gets them back on track. If not, then, I make sure I call that influential person. And I've had that call and that conversation where I've said something good in the past, but then I can use that lever if I need to, if they're not maybe, responding.
How short of a memory should we have with athletes' mistakes when you're dealing with 18 to 20-year-old kids?
Yeah, again, I mean, I think it's somebody that's faith based. I think we're all sinners, right? And so Team Tebow, or I can't remember if it's Tebow or it was maybe it was David. I think it was David Carr, maybe, or Derek Carr. I think it was Derek Carr actually. That they're talking about Henry Ruggs when he had that accident, where he killed somebody, went to jail, and his response in that, when been asked about it, was like, hate the sin, love the sinner. I think with athletes, there's a verse in the Bible you talk about, throw a light into the light, you throw a light into the darkness. I think there's a lot of darkness around, college athletics and kids that are getting pulled a lot of ways. And I know I did as a college athlete as well. And I think there's, I don't think they're still becoming who they're going to become. And I think it's important for them to have people that are steadfast, that have good principles, good morals, that help them navigate that without judgment. I mean, there's only one true judge, and that's not me. And so like my role is to guide and help and be there. And again, that doesn't mean that I got to agree with it or condone it or whatever. But it's my job is to continue to coach them in a direction that's going to make them better.
Now, I got to talk to Pat Ivy here a while back, and you two have moved somewhat into the same role. And it's a very young role that you guys are developing when you start talking about high performance and overseeing a whole athletic development program. There's no playbook for that. You just have to draw on past experience and be willing to fail at new experiences. How are you able to push yourself into such a new frontier?
I wrote a book, 10 years ago, 10 plus years ago, called CEO Strength Coach. And in that book, there's a framework that basically lay out that to be a success, you have to be three things. You have to be a great technician. You have to know sets, reps, progressions, all those things, right? But that's the easy part. But then you got to be a great manager. You have to manage time, people, and resources. And people are the hardest part. And those are the things that we didn't go to school for. We didn't go for organizational leadership and group dynamics and budgeting and all those in business and those types of things. And then you have to be an entrepreneur. You have to be constantly sharpening the sword and thinking outside the box and reinventing yourself and staying current. And sometimes that's creating multiple revenue streams. And so you have to be well versed. You have to have an eclectic learning experience. And you have to think, when everybody else is just studying the strength and conditioning books, you're reading organizational leadership or group dynamics or, psychology or whatever. And I think when you do those things, when you look at other disciplines and you apply them to your discipline, it makes you better. And I think because of that, you become a person that's a problem solver. And I think when you're in those leadership roles like that are being developed, I think that's what people value. It's somebody that can come with perspective that's different, that can provide an answer, that's not afraid to speak up, that doesn't have to be a yes man the whole time, that can challenge things in a respectful way and not get butthurt if their ideas aren't used. I think those are things that people look for in any leader. I think that just naturally applies to the things that are happening naturally in strength and conditioning.
As I was reading about this and kind of preparing for this podcast, listening to a little bit of what that role could do, I wonder, everything trickles down. I know your high school strength conditioning coach experience is limited because you've been in the pros in college, but everything trickles down. Do you possibly see a position like this being useful at the high school level? I mean, the AD's busy, the coaches are busy, but we've got athletes that are wanting to get recruited. We got athletes that are struggling with grades. We got athletes that aren't eating at home. There's so much pressure on them that if we had somebody that was forward thinking in a role like you have, that they could start taking small chunks of plates off of everybody else's stuff and help these athletes. Would that be something that could eventually be beneficial?
Well, there's no doubt that it would be beneficial. I think that role is super important. And I think it's something that when there is a lack of resources, somebody that can tie together all the resources that you do have, I think is vitally important. I think there's so many people that have this kind of reductionist line of thinking where they don't try to solve the problem from being in somebody else's shoes. And so that's one of the things that I always tried to do. I always tried to put myself in the athletic director's shoes or my head coach's shoes or whoever and say, okay, like they've got 20 people coming to them asking them for money for equipment, 20 people coming to them asking for money for more staff members or more money for those staff members or whatever. And so I always tried to solve that problem, paint a vision. And so I think in high school roles, things like that, like the person that goes and says, okay, we don't have a nutritionist, but they solve that problem in some type of way. We don't have sports psychology, but they solve that problem in some type of way, the player development. And then finds ways to support those individuals that are taking on those roles and help upskill them. That's to me a critical piece. In lieu of that, if you don't have that, then the leadership positions have to be that. If you're the math teacher and you're the head football coach and you're an assistant track coach, but you're the head coach and you don't have those things, well, you better be somebody that can go find them and make that happen. And then you put a value on that, on determining how much time and effort and things go into that, and if that position is needed or not. I think what ends up happening most of the time is people, they just don't fill that role either internally or externally. And that's usually a recipe for failure.
You start leaving kids behind that had a future. They just didn't have any help getting there. And as much as we love our children as parents, we don't always know how to get them where they need to go. And we're relying on other people very heavily to help.
Try it. Yeah, I agree.
That point you made in there about seeing the position from other leadership shoes, I think it's taken me 45 years to finally get to the point where I was willing to step back and see what kind of a pain in the butt I was being to my bosses. I've got guys that work for me. Some of them, some days are really hard to deal with. And I had to step back and reflect and be like, am I that guy to my boss? Once that happened, it seems like things really kind of gel a lot better. Was there a point in your life that you realized that, or was that just how you were always internally wired?
Trust me, I'm a bull in the china shop sometimes too. Like there's definitely times where I'll make sure that what I value as important gets done sometimes. But what I found through my experiences, through my career, is that you got more flies with honey. When you solved the problem for them, then that led to when there was resources, getting them applied to you. Because I had an athletic director at Eastern Michigan that I think was really, really great. And, one of the things that I heard her do one time was one of the baseball coaches was complaining about something that they didn't get. And we had gotten something in the weight room. And she was matter of fact, she's like, look, I gave him money because I know he takes care of it. And I walk into your offices and you guys got spit cups everywhere and it's trash everywhere and you don't take care of it. I think, you have an obligation to shore up your area and make sure that you garner resources, but then when you're a good steward of those resources, and if you do that consistently and help them solve problems, every boss wants to look good. If you make your boss look good, like they're going to find ways to help continue to make that happen.
Yeah, you can set up a self-fulfilling prophecy really quick if you just always believe it. Everybody's out to get you, but you're not giving anything back. It turns into a snowball that creates an avalanche.
I think one thing that people forget about any kind of great thing was a vision first. You got to start with vision. And then, the thing that has been natural to me through my career is that I've naturally reverse engineered things to make that happen. If it's, at going into South Florida and having one assistant, and then, by the time I left, we had six assistants. And I did that by putting people in those roles that were unpaid, that were trained, that performed well. And then I would fight when those people would go to leave for better opportunities. That was my opportunity to kind of go into those coaches and be like, hey, look, we could keep this person for a couple of grand a month. We can keep this person for schooling, or we could keep this person, and you just keep fighting for resources. You got to paint the picture, you got to set the vision, and then you got to carry that out. And that's the number one thing that I go into jobs with is saying, hey, look, I'll sit down with my bosses, whoever that is, and I'll say, hey, look, I'll come to you, and if we don't have the resources, we don't have things, I'm good with that. Just tell me, but allow me to think outside the box to solve that problem. Sometimes there's things that they don't always appreciate that I do to solve that problem. And that's when we have a hard conversation and say that's when it's time for you to pony up, or I'm going to solve the problem the way I can solve it.
You had talked about the technician phase earlier, and it's easy to get caught in that phase and be there your whole life. And if that's what you enjoy, that's great. But if you're chasing more, what are some avenues to strategically build yourself into a better leadership role past the technician phase?
Reading is probably the number one thing. I mean, you're talking to a guy that, I mean, I have a PhD now, but at the same time, like I read one book in high school and one book in college. I was not a reader at all, but became an avid reader in my coaching because I wanted to be great. I wanted to be one of the best. And I would always read books from those different areas and rotate around and consume that. So I think reading is one. I think networking is another. I became a head strength coach at 23 years old and one assistant. And I had to reach out to other people that were doing my job other places to learn from, because I didn't have that kind of mentorship in house. And so that formed a natural level of networking that, a skill of networking that I think is super important. And to me, it's always people, if I can, in my old podcast, Iron Game Chalk Talk, you would probably remember that there's a question I would always ask that, what was one of the biggest mistakes you made and how you learned from it? And I always ask that question because I figured if I can avoid other people's mistakes, I can get to where they're at faster. I'm going to make mistakes, but then I can always reach out and learn from those as well. And so sometimes it's removing obstacles, removing hazards instead of just blazing a new path.
In the roles you've been in, especially lately, you've been with some very high achievers, national championship contenders, forward thinkers, guys that are willing to push the envelope to advance wins, create new platforms. Does it make it challenging when you have to step back away from those and deal with an apathetic, less motivated person?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of people that make a lot of assumptions. It was one of the biggest assumptions when I was in the NFL was that they must all love lift the weights, because they worked hard to get to the NFL. And it's like, no, a lot of those guys were just God-given ability that, they were all state without doing anything. Then they went to college and they were all American without barely lifting a weight because they were scoring touchdowns, and then, that was whatever. And all of a sudden they get to the NFL, and then they realize, okay, I need to take care of my body because this is my livelihood. This is what the longer I can, stay in the league. And it's the same thing with high achievers or that kind of mentality. Sometimes it's not always there. Now there are some great examples. Don't get me wrong, and the environment is great. But to answer your question, I do have a hard time with apathetic mentality. And the higher you go up in some of these levels, the people that you surround yourself are typically high achievers that are self motivated and self driven and want to do a good job. Sometimes I really struggle with the motivations of why they want to do a good job. Is it for the athlete? Is it for themselves? Is it for notoriety and fame? But yeah, I mean, it is very, very hard for me to be around people that are constantly trying to improve.
Now, do you believe people are born with that drive? Do you think that's something given to them at birth, or do you think it can be cultivated and developed to create a better drive?
I'm a firm believer that you have to have a growth mindset. If you're going to be a coach, I think if not, then I think if you believe that people are just the way they are, then what's the value of a coach really? So I think that everybody can change. I think it is, I think some people have to learn it more that maybe they weren't in environments, for nature and nurture that allowed for them to develop those things. But this is the conversation I have with my kids, my wife, the people that are closest to me is for me, it was never about intelligence or God-given ability or talent, whatever you want to say. Like it was pure, like relentless pursuit, and I think that starts with passion. I think you have to have passion for something. And if you have passion for something, then you'll do things that you wouldn't normally do. You'll form habits that you maybe didn't normally have to achieve those things. And so typically my experience has been the people that are apathetic, they're lacking passion. And if you can help them find what that passion is, then it usually leads to the changes in behavior that you're looking for.
Now, you were just talking about relentless pursuit, and I've had things that I've been super passionate about and I've chased with every fiber of my being. And then sometimes at the end of the day, even as much as you love it, like reality hits you. And I don't even know that it's reality. It's that voice in your head that says that you're wasting your time, or you're so and so has this and you don't. And why are all the breaks going to somebody else when you're out there in the middle of it every day? So when the line gets so blurry, how do you keep yourself focused, centered, and pursuing it no matter what the edges may look like?
Well, I mean, it's very much a coach answer, but like it's really the journey and the process that's the fulfilling part. You have to find value in that, and you have to recognize along the way the milestones and the skills that you develop when you pursue something with that kind of passion. Sometimes you fall short. I mean, obviously we fell short in the national championship. It's something I've been working for my whole career. The memories of that season, the relationships that were formed, the pursuit of that. When you really think about it, it's like, and I've had this thought of like, if we would have won that game, would have changed anything really about me? And no, I mean, externally, you maybe just tack on national champion to whatever, like, yeah, I think you even did it in the intro, like you said, contender. And that was a little bit of a dagger there, but at the same time, like, yeah, nothing about me would have changed, because of that result. And so I think as coaches, as motivators, as mentors, like our job is to remind people of the things that they've accomplished, the skills that they're developing, all the things that come with chasing something great, and I think that happens in anything, same thing with your relationships with your spouse, relationships with your kids, with all those things. Like there's you got to find the value in that.
You had talked about networking a minute ago, and then now we're talking a little bit about relationships. So, networking is relationships, and you're trying to foster those and grow them. You ran a podcast, or you have another one started. So you have guests on, and then the next week you're moving to the next person. But you've built a network with the person that was on. How do you keep that growing so that they don't feel like you were just somebody that you utilize for a few minutes and then boof, you're off to the new best thing?
Yeah, that's difficult. I think I, what I've done is I've formed kind of a, I don't even know what I call it. It's like a top 1,000, you know. And so like I have people that I respond I talk to probably weekly. When I say talk to, that could be a text, that could be a voice memo, that could be, something. Then I have people that I do monthly. Then I have people that are quarterly, and then I have people that are annually. I'll put in my phone like their birthday, and I kind of have like a quick message that is kind of summary of what's happened in the year. Like, here's an update on us, but happy birthday, and just staying connected even once a year sometimes with some of these relationships is important. But it's the same thing I tell like people when they talk about like work-life balance. Like I don't think work-life balance exists. Like if you're going to be great at anything, that's going to be skewed a little bit. And so what I would tell people is like, especially early in my career, it might have been 90-10. Like it might have been 90 work and 10 home. But when I was home, I was 100% present. I was 100% intentional. Like I would go and climb mountains and go on hikes and do things that I was intentionally trying to make memories so that my kids, you know, those were anchor moments as they developed. And so I think it's the same thing with relationships. When you do have the moment where you are connected, make that a memorable moment, make that them feel some type of way. And so for some people that's just a note on their birthday. For some people that's driving down the road, you see something that reminds you of them, and it's just a quick 2-second text, And I think when you do that organically like that or intentionally, then I think people appreciate it.
You talked about staying present. In the field, you're a multitasker. You're handling so many things at one time. You're delegating authority. You're doing all of these things to get the job done. It's very easy to step out of the present and start looking at past, future, next week, next month. How are you able to intentionally stay present? What strategies do you employ to keep you from wandering off in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of ways to look at that. I think you have to. There's what is it called, Maker, and can't remember the name of the book, but there's basically called like Maker time and something else time. I can't remember what the two concepts were, but essentially it's like time that you're working in the business and then time that you're working on the business. And so like I think when you're in the business, when you whatever that business is, you have to be 10 toes down, right? Like you have to be there because especially with what we do, like that's athletes. And I go back to like relationships and moments in my coaching career that were super impactful to me by just being in the moment, right? And being, that one little encouragement, that one little push can change a person's life. That's what I love about coaching. But I think at the same time, you have to make time in your day that you're planning, you're thinking about the future, that you're forecasting, that so as long as I think you train your day, I think you allocate you and budget your time appropriately. And if you're doing both of those things, then you're fulfilled. If you lack on one of those things, it's going to show up.
All right, as you're talking about all the buckets that you're placing your time in and where you want to go, how are you able to prepare yourself for future roles, even when that step may be somewhat unclear? I mean, I know me and you both like research. We both like to read books. We both like so much stuff about kind of being a nerd, but the path isn't necessarily clear. How do you decide where to go? What book should you even read? You're in a vast bookstore. You've talked about that multiple times. How do you even decide what book to pick up next? Where are you headed?
I think for me, I'm very inquisitive. I'm always asking questions. I'm always going down a rabbit hole. And I think that's where it starts for me. I literally have a list on my Trello board of things to research. And so at night, when I lay down at 10 o'clock, I'll go down a rabbit hole on some topic that I have listed, just consume as much information as I can on that topic. And sometimes that keeps me up all night, literally keeps me up all night. But I think when you go back to relating it to like the next steps in your career, I think asking questions and what I learned through a couple different instances in my career, the one that makes the most, that had kind of the most aha moment for me was I was in China with my wife negotiating a multi-million dollar deal with a family that brought the Olympics to China. And we're in this restaurant and we're working through an interpreter and we're sitting across from each other in this big old table. And we just realized that this guy is worth, I mean, billions, probably. And he's just trying to figure it out also. Like he's just trying to figure out what questions to ask and I'm sitting here and I'm all nervous because I'm with this big wig CEO type, an influential person. And I just realized that they're just trying to figure it out too. And the only thing that they have more access to is they're in more rooms than I am. And the more rooms that I'm in, the easier that gets. And so I think to your point, to your question, I think you got to put yourself in more rooms, whether that's you're putting in books, whether you're jumping on different, you know, focus groups, whether or not you're hiring committees, whatever it is. I think when you start getting into these things, then if you're curious and you start asking these kind of questions, then you're going to gain knowledge and you're going to gain the kind of formalities that go with all these different situations, and it's going to make you well rounded. And all of a sudden you're going to, and you do have a unique perspective. I mean, that's why I called the book the CEO Strength Coach, because you develop skills that if you were in any other industry, you would be the CEO of. To get people to go run through a wall and then come back and pick up the pieces every day and do something that they don't want to do, like that takes skill that not a lot of people have. And a lot of businesses and a lot of work that, I mean, that's handsomely rewarded with salary and those types of things. And so I think recognizing that and then putting yourself in different situations to be able to kind of put your perspective, then you start to gain confidence in the fact that you could contribute in a bigger way than the four walls of a weight room.
Have you ever put yourself in a position where now you're in a room and you kind of look around and you ask yourself how the heck you even ended up here?
Yeah,
Like,
every day.
I I got to meet Chris Kerr through the podcast, and all of a sudden I got invited to a men's group. I joined the men's group, and I'm trying to do it while I'm at work and do all these things, but I get in the men's group and it's all hockey guys. They all played, professional hockey or collegiate hockey. I know nothing about hockey, but all these guys are super, super down for hockey. And it's just like, it was a great group to be in. It was just so out of my comfort zone. I was kind of looking around thinking, how the heck did I even get to be here?
Right. I love that. I mean, to me, that lifts me up because it's one of those things. Because if you just put a bunch of strength coaches in the same room, all they're going to talk about is sets and reps and all these things, right? And I think when you get in these other areas, you just uh, again, I'm an inquisitive person by nature, but I think when you get in those areas, then you're going to find ways to shine just because you're different, but you're also going to be able to sit back and just learn and see how other people respond to the world. And I think that that's important.
So in all this research and chasing rabbit trails and all of these things, what's the craziest thing that you've kind of gotten on a path with?
Uh, oh man, I could have all kinds of things. Like, uh, trying to think what would be the craziest thing.
And I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I mean, I get
Yeah,
down so many rabbit holes,
yeah.
like,
I mean, I go down like, I mean, probably the craziest thing, or one of the craziest things I'm probably down right now is AI and just how people are using AI. But but I mean, everything from finance to like, I'm the most anti handyman person known to planet Earth, but I'll go down freaking watching videos of construction projects and all these things. And again, like a lot of times I'll never do those things, but it's kind of the old adage, if you can just take one thing away from. And so I think to be a great coach, you have to be a great storyteller. To be a great storyteller, you have to be educated. And I think, you have to have examples. And so I try to find these examples in these different kind of weird things to be able to use with athletes. And so a lot of times I think that was maybe a lot of those rabbit holes have been like things my kids were reading or things that my players were interested in, or I would go down those rabbit holes and then, it just that formed this kind of connection or this kind of conversation that framed me in a different way with our athletes.
That's how I get down some of these ideas. Or a kid will come in and say that they're struggling with something in class. Well, maybe I haven't taken that class in a long time, so I have to pop up a YouTube video and try to get to a point where I can help them to understand it better. And so I end up researching some stuff that I would never probably intentionally do on my own. But yeah, helping other people learn to build relationships through what they enjoy creates a lot of research.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Again, it goes back to me. I think you have to be naturally curious. I think you have to be constantly asking questions. But I think probably more important than that is coaches in general have no shortage of ideas. They have no shortage of things that pop up in their head. You're literally working sometimes for 16 hours a day. Like you have lots of thoughts, right? But the documenting of that and the coming back to it and not forgetting about it, and that's the part that I think coaches are notoriously bad at time management. And so, like, I know every night at 10 o'clock, I'm going to lay in bed and I'm going to freaking research something for at least an hour and go down so that instead of watching whatever TV show is out there. So I think you just got to find, like, document it, find time for it, and then budget resources towards it.
I've found that I can turn on what would be a very boring show in the background just to kill the quietness, and I can study better probably that way than any other way, like Anthony Bourdain or Ancient Aliens or something crazy that I'm not really that interested in, but it kills all that background noise and keeps my mind focused on what I'm doing. I seem to have made some headway doing that.
Yeah.
Now, you had talked about AI in there just a little bit. As I've getting older, I was really hesitant to use it. I'm not going to lie, because I didn't want it to take away from my own creative ideas. But I've learned to balance that, I hope, where it's not giving me the ideas, but it's helping to get my ideas out. How do you see that moving into the future? Are we one day going to be at a point where there is no ideas that actually come from people?
I don't think that. I think that's what separates man from machine, right? I think is the ingenuity and the free thought and all the things that kind of go with that. I think it's a tool just like any tool. I think it's the people that are struggling with it are the same people that struggled with the automobile, from the horse and buggy, that struggled from cell phone, rotary phone to cell phone, whatever the things have transitions have been. And with everything comes the bad actors and the negativity that comes with advancement. But I think there's also the benefits that come from it. And if you look at it in terms of a relationship and going back and forth and really, like you said, kind of how do I get my own thoughts from this or contribute to it? I think that's the way of the future. I do think it's if people don't accept it as part of the future, then I think you can be in a lot of trouble, and specifically in coaching. I mean, we're not too far away, probably within the next 5 years of you taking a home blood prick kit, uploading it to AI, it's spitting out the perfect workout plan, the perfect diet, the perfect everything, based off your body. You're probably going to be wearing some sort of smartwatch or necklace or something that's going to choke the crap there. It's going to shock the crap out of you if you don't do what you're supposed to be doing, right? Like that stuff's coming. If we only hang our hat on programming like a lot of strength coaches do, oh, I'm right, the perfect program and they can never replace me, and like you're in trouble. That's already done. But I think if you look at it like, okay, how do we go to the next step with it? Where's the evolution of it? How do I use this tool in a different way? I think then you can stay current. And again, that's why part of that framework is to be an entrepreneur and stay forward thinking, because the world is always going to change. There's always going to be advancements. How you incorporate that in is the key. And then you got to be, you also have to be vigilant and realize that, like, if people are writing books now or even doing videos, like there's a pretty good chance that some of that stuff's not their own thoughts, and you can't take it as Bible. What you got to take everything with a grain of salt.
That's what I wonder in skilled trades, what's going to happen. You've been on the floor for years as a technician. AI cannot replace that. An electrician in the field, bending conduit, pulling wire, all that stuff. AI is not going to help you to a certain extent with that job. But some of these other jobs that may not be so technical and be there and actually have to create a product physically, I wonder if we'll see people move into those roles that really don't deserve to be there, but they were able to cheat good enough that it put them there.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's bad actors, and I think there's ways to that it can be negatively used. And just like anything, I mean, people have gotten jobs off nepotism or different things that, to me, one of the things I would always tell people, whether it's diversity or gender or, connections and, playing connections or whatever, like use whatever, it's a very competitive field. Like use whatever it's going to help you to get there, but you better be prepared when you get there, because you'll get exposed if you're not. Again, I think that's part of the people that do it the right way is helping bring light to the people that aren't doing it the right way. I think it's going to be the same thing when it comes to AI is doing that. But I think, embracing it, realizing it's part of it, learning how to use it in a way that, you become almost like an AI engineer when it comes to strength and conditioning or coaching or whatever. Like I would put some effort into that.
Now, before I have to let you off here, we've been hitting all these questions, and this one's really broad, and I'll let you get as specific as you want with it. But I just started reading the book Good to Great, and it's going through how these companies have managed to make a switch in a field and go from just an average stock price to going through the roof with small changes. You walk into a program, it's pretty good. You look around, you evaluate what's going on. You're okay. You're winning games. You're going 9-3. You're catching a bowl game. I understand there's more than just strength coach involved in that, but how do you do your part? What are things that you look at that will help you turn your program from good, fans are pretty happy, to great, we're playing in the big game?
In that book, they do a good job of like laying out like the implementation or like the vision and all those different things. And I look at it kind of like finances, right? In finances, you can create additional revenue streams and give yourself a raise that way. But more importantly, like one of the first things you should do, and one of the foundational things that you should do, is plug the leaks. Like, where do you have money going out that doesn't need to go out? Because if you just make more money and you have more ways for that money to go out, then like because you didn't plug the leaks, it's just gonna make those holes bigger, right? So I think it's the same thing, in that book there. One of the main principles that not only a lot of people take away from it is that you got to confront the brutal facts. And so you need somebody in your organization that is not looking through it with rose-colored glasses, that is looking for the inefficiencies and is willing and has the ability to bring that to the table in a respectful way, and has the enough credibility to where when it is brought up, it's addressed. And I think a lot of times when you go into these organizations, like leaders, they squash down people that kind of rebel in some type of way, or maybe they're not, they're always pointing out the negative things, or things like that. And again, you got to do it in the right way. But those people are valuable. Like if they're loyal, they work hard, and they do, but they also point out some of the flaws. Like that's the person you want in your organization. Now, if they're out, you go outside the office and they're negative across the entire organization, they bring that with them, then that's a cancer, right? And so I think whenever you go into these situations, you gotta, there's another good book called Switch by Chip and Dan Heath, but like they talk about when they would go into these villages that were malnourished, like everybody failed, but the one that succeeded was the one that identified the bright spots too. One thing that I would always tell our head coach and others is I think you got to have those two angels in your organization, right? You got to have somebody that's constantly pointing out the inefficiencies and, is working on the business. And then you got to have somebody that's kind of working vision casting and always working on what's next, right? And both of those people are super valuable.
Learning to be comfortable with the people in the organization that don't see it how you do. Was that a challenge, or have you learned to embrace it over the years, or was it something that you always sought out?
It's always come natural to me because I'm just a skeptic by heart, I guess, or somebody that always thinks they can be better or improved or, those types of things. What I've had to learn is how to communicate that in a better way, without it always being negative or with the people around. But yeah, I think for me, that's always been natural.
Coach, I know you're incredibly busy. You carved out some time to come on here. I can't thank you enough, you know, to sit down, answer all these questions. I try to keep it a little bit different than maybe some other stuff you'd answered in the past. Hopefully I was able to do that, but your time, it was very important to me. Thank you very much, Coach.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Well, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
You too, buddy. Thanks.